All right, it is with bittersweet enthusiasm that I introduce our closing keynote speaker. Andrew Nelson is founder and president at Nelson Aerospace Consulting Associates. He's recognized as a leader in the emerging commercial space sector and as the originator of the Lynx wet lease concept at the heart of the X-Core go-to-market strategy for Lynx, which is X-Core's suborbital reusable space vehicle. Today, Mr. Nelson is going to be talking about the LEO economy and beyond. Please welcome Mr. Nelson.
Well, gosh, I forgot about the wet lease and the Lynx. Holy mackerel. So, little context. X-Core Aerospace. I used to run X-Core. So, Dale Amon works for me. You're not allowed to ask questions. No, I'm just joking. You can ask whatever you want. And the wet lease model was an interesting concept we're going to take overseas, but it has been reused. Astranis is using a concept of the wet lease for their small GEO satellites on orbit. And yesterday I sat with a young woman who's going to be a legal counsel at Astranis. Is Ms. Gunderson still here? Oh, she left. Okay. Well, first off, I'd like to say thank you to a number of people for doing this. This was an incredible inaugural conference. I've run some big conferences in the day. I started a little thing called the MIT CFO Summit, which is now in its 15th or 18th year, and it's huge. And I know the first time it's terribly challenging. And you guys did a heck of a lot better than I ever did getting some great speakers here. So I'm super impressed. So Justine and Priscilla and Robin and Jamie and Barbara, who were very patient with me. Thank you very much. I think we should give them all a round of applause. And at the Carnegie Science Center, I met two great ladies, Kim and Nicole. There's Nicole. Where's Kim? Is she still here? Oh, she's gone. So I think they're a fabulous facility. So I wanted to thank them as well. I was very happy to see when I showed up at this conference a lot of old friends. So John Thornton, who I've known since about 07, 08. Ken Shields, who was sitting, oh, he left, see, everyone's gone. I told them at the speaker's dinner if they stayed here, I'd buy them drinks afterwards. So that clearly they're not drinkers. Bernie McShay, there he is. Bernie's still here. He used to do work down in Florida. Dylan Taylor, I mentioned, who's already left. He ain't go way back. Dale, we all know Dale. Carnegie Mellon grad. And Bristol Gunderson, who I got to know at this conference, but I've known Sam, her dad, forever. And so now we're on the second generation in commercial space. My daughter works at the Commercial Spaceflight Federation in Washington, D.C., so if you see Katie Nelson, say you met her dad, and she'll go, oh, God, what did he say? But it was great to meet new acquaintances as well. So Siobhan Mullaney, nice to meet you and have dinner with you guys. And Ken Savin from Redwire. I think Ken's maybe gone. Alexandra Redlinsky from, there she is. And Janice Studemeyer, who I don't know why we don't know each other. We've been in the industry like, well, I'll say 30 years for me. And it's so great to meet you finally. But kudos to the participants. I mean, it's incredible who you got here. You got two senior appropriators, one from the Senate, one from the House. And you got one of them to chair a panel. I don't realize you never see that anywhere. I mean, you don't even see that at the FAA's Commercial Space Transportation Conference. You had a NASA administrator show up in Pittsburgh, which is like great. I'm like, I mean, I used to live in Bill Nelson's district, and I couldn't get him to come to a Young Democrats event, right? I mean, although I wasn't a Young Democrat, I tried. And then you had two associate administrators at the same time. Thank God no one targeted the Science Center, you know? And you also had representatives from two senators. So I just want to say thank you. It's incredible. You guys need to give yourself a round of applause because you don't have no idea how well you did. I mean, it was pretty amazing. Okay, so now that I've done that, okay. Oh yeah, I got slides. Okay. Oh, and they're right there. Perfect. Okay, I like to walk, but I'll try to stay put. How do I do? I just push the green button. Okay, yeah. I went to that other tech school out east, so we don't have, yeah, okay. I'll try this, and then if I get a little antsy, I'll start moving around. Okay, so after Dylan Taylor spoke, I said, God, Dylan, I'm going to have to change half my slides because, he took 3/4 of my stuff, but that's okay. He'd seen me talk a couple years ago. I think he stole it. So anyway, okay, hey, theft is a great flattery, right? Okay, so this is the vision, I think, that we all in the space industry hope for. That's me walking across to work, and that's Justine hanging out with Nicole, checking the view out before they go to work in the other direction. And we're at, a few hundred miles up. And if you look on the outside of that vehicle, it might say Axiom, or it might say, Voyager, or it might say Aerospace and Blue Origin, Orbital Reef, or something else. But that's, I think, what we're all really hoping for. Living and working in space, becoming a multi-planet species, because heavens knows there are little things that go bump in the night in the solar system. And as Dylan mentioned, it's a very harsh environment. Even this is a nice oasis, but we got to make sure that we have a backup plan. Dinosaurs didn't have a backup plan, so there you go. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about a LEO economy and beyond. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges to that vision that we just looked at. Role of standards, norms, and regulations. I did not add that after Dylan's speech. I already had standards in there. One of my roles in my bio is I'm the vice chairman of the ASTM F-47 Commercial Space Standards Committee. There is one, and we've been around for about 5 years, and we're really starting to hit our stride, and I'll tell you about that on a couple slides. And then a little bit about the road ahead and how Pittsburgh is the center of the universe. We hope. Okay. So what is the LEO economy today and beyond? Today, the space industry is about $350, $400 billion a year, and people think it's going to go to $1 to $2 trillion. You saw some of those numbers earlier. And most of that economy is LEO. It's mostly communications. And what's the definition of a trillion? I always like to say it's one and then a whole bunch of zeros, right? Now, the question is, what is a trillion? That's a really weird concept to try to get your mind around. But let's think about it in markets. Who thinks the global airline revenue around the world, not today, but let's say 2019, okay, because we had a little thing called a pandemic and airlines were crushed, was $1 trillion revenue marketplace? Raise your hand. Global airline revenue. 55, 60 global airlines. Okay. So in 2009, it was about $500 billion. In 2019, 10 years later, it was about $850 billion. So it wasn't quite there yet, but it's close. But I would have thought when I first did this research that it's got to be $1 trillion. Okay. So then you say, okay, by the way, I had some other slides I cut out. I had some other markets, little trickier ones like global electricity generation. Oh, everyone does that one. But it's a trick. It's a definitional thing. But I didn't put that slide in. So, global e-commerce retail sales. Who thinks that's $1 trillion a year marketplace? It's okay. You can put your hands up. Put your hands up. Everyone put their hands up, both of them. Okay. Okay. So, it turns out that our friends at Goldman Sachs, and everyone trusts Goldman Sachs, predicted in 2013 it was going to reach about $1 trillion. Turns out, in 2013, it was about 1.25 trillion. And by 2017, it was going to go to 2.35 trillion. But what year are we in now? 2022. So 2022, it's actually 5 or 6, and they say it's going to be going up to 7 or 8 trillion. That's massive. Now, that's an interesting number because you heard earlier about supply chain and how satellites and remote sensing at a much greater level of granularity can perhaps push those numbers even higher. And you see that growth curve, okay, starts to taper off. I think it might potentially pick back up. But interesting. So, how do you create these big markets and what are the structures of those markets? One thing you have to do is you have to fundamentally change something that impacts, and I put this in quotes, everyone. And the way you do that, if you think of a market, you think of it as an inverted pyramid, at least that's the way I do. And at the bottom of the pyramid, and you can sort of define the types of enterprises and how many enterprises are in that sector of the market and what's it really cost to get into something like that. And so at the bottom level, you have infrastructure, okay? So you think of cell phone towers and you think of fiber in the ground and that sort of stuff. And you have platforms that lay on top of that. So maybe your iPhone, right? And then of course on top of that are gobs of applications. Well, we're still sort of in the infrastructure stage when it comes to space, but typically you're going to have 3 to 10 major players in the infrastructure piece, right? You got AT&T, you got whoever else you use for Verizon, et cetera. But typically those investments are in the billions in order to get there, right? Platforms. Platforms, you can have tens of competitors to potentially thousands of competitors. It just depends on the market type. But typically those investments are going to be in the tens to hundreds to perhaps $1 billion. So let's take example, if you want to get into the small launch market today, you can expect to spend $150 to $200 million before you get there. Is that a platform? Is that an infrastructure? Well, we can argue about that all day long. But it's there. And then applications, of course, you can have millions of applications. And if you have a smart kid, it doesn't cost them anything to do an app up in their bedroom, but some people can spend tens to 50s of millions of dollars. So I like to think of these industries like that. But how do you build a $1 trillion marketplace? Then you got to solve a fundamental need in a very uniquely way that's different, but is valued by others, right? And typically you're going to need a very enlightened regulatory framework. And you need innovation and visionary leadership. So how do we translate that to space? Well, fortunately, in about 1984 and continuing on over a number of years, we've created an enlightened regulatory framework. We have to make sure that that enlightened regulatory framework remains with us. There are others. There are many who are wanting to really lay on strong regulation. But the first thing you needed to do was solve the launch bottleneck, and I think we're getting really close to that. And that was, of course, through reusable spacecraft, launchers. We've heard about the small satellite revolution, that sort of thing. But the one thing that we really, really need now, we sort of solved some of these problems, is established rules of the road, which we really don't have yet. 2 ships going up and down the river, barges. They got special lights on them. One person stays to the right, one person stays to the left. If they're getting close, they know that in an emergency, they turn the appropriate way. There's rules. That doesn't happen in space. Right now, they get an alert. Hey, SpaceX, your satellite's going to run into our ESA satellite. They get an email. Well, it's a little bit better now. Or they might, if they're lucky, they get a phone call. And then pretty soon, someone's got to move. It's getting a lot better. There's companies actually who are trying to solve some of this. I'll get to that later. But established rules of the road is really going to be important in our industry. And so if you look at this sort of from a launch, this is just representative. We talked earlier about launch costs getting from $20,000 a pound to $5,000 and now $1,000 and potentially $500 and perhaps lower. It's really representative. When you get the number of operations increasing, you're going to get cost per kilogram going down, and so you got the red and the black, and it's going to meet somewhere in the middle. Purely representative. So, classic supply demand. But what's that industry really going to look like? This is just my guess. I did it about 4 or 5 years ago, so I use terms. Still haven't updated it. Asteroid mining is now resource utilization, right? Which is great. But when you're growing from about $300 billion a year and you want to sort of double or triple, if you have a 6%, 7% compound annual growth rate over 10 years, what's that equal? It's a double, right? If it's 10% compound annual growth rate over 7 years, it's a double. I love the symmetry of those numbers. So we're really looking at potentially a quadrupling or more of the marketplace over 20 years. Again, throw your numbers in, 7-8% compound annual growth rate, and you've got it. A significant amount is going to be communications. Replace asteroid mining with resource utilization, or lunar power stations, or whatever you like. I think governments are going to be probably bigger than what I show here, especially if you count in some DoD numbers. But that's just one view of the big rocks of the marketplace. But what's some of the things you're going to do? Okay, we knew space-based solar power might be an interesting one. As we heard earlier, solar power on the moon sounds like a pretty interesting market in the future too. You've got the platinum asteroid. We've always talked about that. Replace platinum with whatever else material that's important, water. You've got orbital manufacturing and presence. This is a picture of the new orbital reef concept. And you've got a future version of Deep Space Industries, which, rest in peace. I don't think they're around anymore, or maybe they got absorbed into something. But, this is a cool artistic concept. Grab yourself something from the asteroid belt and start building space stations out of it. And that's where all these robots come in that are going to come out of Pittsburgh. Lunar and beyond. Probably recognize that image. I stole it right off of the Astrobotic website. And there's another one. So, and then of course, our future version and view of being permanently present on the lunar surface. So very exciting. Platforms and applications. Who made money in, well, I'll get that to them in the next slide. So platforms and applications could be, for example, we heard about CubeSats. We know about Skybox. Skybox was on, like I said, Dylan stole all of my slides. So he had Skybox on his. It was one of the first low-cost imaging satellites that got put up. It's now part of Planet. It was also one of the first big liquidity events for a VC investing in space business, and it really set the stage in Silicon Valley for the investments by Bessemer and others. So that was a very pivotal time. People made a lot of money. Google ended up buying it, and then Google sold it to Planet, and now Planet has them. And of course, we've 3D printing. Our folks from Penn State, where are they? Concrete on the moon? There you go. So there's your picture. Okay. And then, who made money in the gold rush? People who sold picks and shovels, and Levi Strauss and all those people. This is where the future is. Human spaceflight is going to need pressure suits. Small electrical thrusters and micro thrusters. All these small satellites need to get pushed around sometime and get put in place. Payload processing services companies. Robots on the moon. So this is actually a picture from a business plan contest that Mike Massimino and I judged at MIT about 10, 11 years ago. And we now know what the real version of that looks like, because it's called a cube rover, and I thought they said cute rover, and I thought because it is cute. But we saw one obviously on the tour. And I asked the guy at the business plan, why do you have an aeroshell around your rover? You're on the moon. There's no air. And he says, well, it just looked cool. I said, okay. So he was in college. So, test and training. Blue Abyss is a concept, a deep, deep pool that the oil and gas industry would also use for offshore oil research. And then Zero Gravity Solutions is still a company around, directed gene expression. They are in the agricultural space. So there's all sorts of cool picks and shovels applications. But we have challenges to this vision, right? And many of those challenges are, first thing, where are we? Where are you? Space situational awareness is a big issue. You have companies now like Leo Labs who are coming out. You've got lots of different AI and big data sets, and that's what I'm trying to solve this problem. We have regulatory challenges. It took quite a while for Congress to figure out who they really wanted to lead this thing, and now they've figured it out. They're barely funding them. There might be some money coming up this year. I think that's $60 million, but not enough. So, and then on top of that, you have space traffic control eventually. So that's a huge challenge. It's a huge impediment to the growth of this market. As I said, there's too much stuff and there's lots of it. So orbital debris. Orbital debris is definitely a problem that we have to solve. We talked about it a little bit yesterday. I asked the congressman a question about brownfield cleanups, and if they take the same mindset, then, and you perhaps put bounties on things, and perhaps the small things they get more money for rather than the big things, which are sort of easy. It's sort of a golf score, right? The lower the golf score, the better. The smaller the item, the better. You know, but they've got lots of concepts. They've got sort of the laser concept, and they've got the net concept, and they've got the grappling hook and, you know, servicing vehicle concept, and these things. So lots of solutions, and some of them will work. Maybe all of them will work. They might be all appropriate, but to me, that's a very rich and interesting business, to be the waste management and the garbage man of space. If someone would pay me to do that, now we just got to find someone to pay it. It might be that we have funding mechanisms. You know, there's going to be billions and billions of bits flowing back and forth with Kuiper and Starlink and OneWeb and Link and AST Space Mobile and all these companies that want to do various things. Well, you know, I pay a lot of tax on my cell phone bill already. You know, an extra buck or two is not going to kill me. But if it cleans up space, then I think it might be interesting. So there are definitely funding mechanisms that are available to solve this problem. And there's business models to solve this problem. But who's in charge, right? That's another problem. We talked a little bit about that, but you know, congressional authority and president's budget sometimes don't line up. Fortunately, in the space business, we've had an incredible amount of bipartisanship. Every once in a while, partisanship raises its little ugly head, but for the most part, space has been immune to that so far. We just hope it needs to stay that way. And of course, in the regulation world, we have FAA, we have FCC, we've got, you know, NASA's not a regulator, but do we need an international body? I think a lot of people right now say we don't want an international body, but I know the International Civil Aviation Organization has been trying to get in this business for 15 years, and it's been sort of held off. You know, look for potential future, you know, international frameworks. We do have, of course, some international rules of the road, the various conventions that were passed in the 60s and that sort of thing. But we always have to worry about bumps in the night, right? You can design a great system. Space weather. Everyone knows what happened to the 40 or 44 Starlink satellites a month or so ago? I know you know, Dale. Yep, I mean, it's amazing. They launch a satellite, boom, big solar flare, and 40 of the 40 satellites say, oops, that's not a good day for me, and away they went. So that's only going to be getting worse because we have a solar max coming up in 2025, 2026, and you know, right now predictions are it's pretty bad. Cyber threats. You know, no one wants to talk about cyber threats, but we have them. There was a satellite data provider over Europe who couldn't provide data on a certain morning not too long ago, and it was a cyber attack on those systems that prevented a lot of data flowing in and out of the Ukraine, and that's just going to continue. And then you have other threats. So there's all sorts of orbital weapons. You've got the sneaky approach, I'd call it. There's been several close approaches to satellites that were unwanted, where you had small CubeSats or small satellites approach geo satellites and others, which were people worry about. Of course, we've had a lot of laser blinding situations with Earth observation satellites. And of course, we've seen a number of ASAT tests in the recent years. And I only expect those to continue. You know, as soon as North Korea figures out how to launch a missile, they're probably going to try one. You know, Iran, I'm sure, is dying to do one. So, you know, we always have these bumps in the night that we have to worry about, and that's another potential impediment to this great vision we've got. And of course, rules of the road with the concomitant complexity. This is just one example of a satellite servicing sort of rules of the road image that I found, and I'm not going to go into it, but suffice it to say, you know, when you have aircraft, you know, aircraft have the green light and the red light, and when they're approaching, they sort of know which way they're coming from. You know, there's a TCAS system in the aviation world, traffic collision avoidance system. A variety of things that have built up over the years. And none of those rules of the road are present in space. And we need much better data, we need much faster data. And so anyway, it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be simple, it's not going to be quick. But how do we get there? Standards, norms, and regulation. Remember I said I don't want regulation? Well, we have to have a little bit of regulation. But let's talk about standards first. Standards. Who likes to watch paint dry? Yeah, no one does. Okay. Standards is a little bit like watching paint dry. Sometimes some people describe it as watching the sausage getting made, so it can gross you out. But standards are important. I was happy to hear a call for that earlier this morning from Dylan. But it's really, in the U.S., it's based upon two key things. The first is the National Technology Transfer and Advancement Act of 1995, NTTA. And then there was an OMB Circular A19 that sort of encoded that. But basically what it says is that federal government employees, number one, are encouraged to participate, and they can even take a leadership role. But number two, more importantly, is that if there is a consensus-based standard that's developed by an entity that has certain characteristics, openness, balance of interest, due process, appeals process, consensus, then a regulatory body of the U.S. government can point to that consensus-based standard as a means of compliance with that regulation. And that's super important. So recently the FAA passed a new streamlined launch and reentry regulation called Part 450, 14 CFR Part 450, and they are publishing advisory circulars. It's a performance-based standard, some advisory circulars on one way of meeting that compliance. Some of those advisory circulars aren't out. Some of them aren't scheduled to be done for 6 months to a year. Industry wants some means of compliance. You always have an alternative means of compliance if you would like. If you want to bring your approach to ASTM F47, we can put it through the process and it get published as an alternative means of compliance to Part 450, and people are interested in doing that. So, but that's the fundamental basis. So what's going on? ASTM F47, I'm vice chairman. Mike Lopez Alegria, we all know who Mike LA is? Raise your hand. Yeah, he's our chairman. And he's been doing something for the last 9 months, a year. I don't know what he's been doing. Maybe he's been training for this thing called the AX-1 mission. Oh yeah, he's up on the ISS right now. So I've actually been doing all of his work, and I tease him about it all the time. But anyway, we were formed in 2016 with the support and interest from the Commercial Spaceflight Federation and industry. There are nearly about 110 members now, about 9 subcommittees, 6 published standards, and full committee meets in person when we don't have COVID twice a year, typically at the Space Symposium and then once in DC. And we meet monthly, lots of task groups every day of the week. I won't go into the eye chart, but suffice it to say, there's 3 phases that we've followed. The first phase was learning how to do standards and learning how to work the ASTM process and working on some quick user pull standards, first 4 or 5. Since then, there's a thing, who knows what the moratorium is? That's the unofficial dirty word. It's called the learning period. Anyone know what the learning period is? So I know you, okay. So the learning period, let me explain. So the learning period is in law today, in space law in the US, you are not allowed, if you're a federal government employee, allowed to regulate human spaceflight. Okay, we're in a learning period. If you put a lot of regulations in, you inhibit innovation. So right now, when you fly to space, like Dylan did, he signs a piece of paper, informed consent waiver, and no one from the FAA has looked at that vehicle to say it's safe. So it's dangerous. Spaceflight's dangerous, right? And so that's what the learning period is. And there's been various extensions of the learning period. It's now going to retire at the end of October 2023. At the end of October 2023. So at that point, the FAA, if they want, can, put in human spaceflight regulations. So right now, we are working on a set of consensus-based standards that are focused on that, so that when the time comes, the FAA can point to it. We figured it better, do something to ourselves than have the government, move forward without you. And so we have great participation from NASA, FAA, Commerce, all sorts of different bodies and interests. We brief Congress a couple times a year on the status of these things. So it is moving forward. Now, this is my appeal. All of you, I want you to join a standards committee. It's great stuff. It's fun. We're a great group of people, especially that guy right there from Aerospace, John. I have to point you out. Okay, cool. Okay. Now, this is cool. Standards from space. Okay, so on April 14th, 2022 at GMT 12:30, we did the very first live from the ISS standards meeting. We had an agenda. We had a call for an approval of the agenda under Robert's Rules of Order. We had a first, we had a second, it was adopted. We approved the meeting minutes, we had a meeting, and we adjourned the meeting 15 minutes later, and Mike L.A. led us from the ISS. A big feat. Really exciting. We had about 12 members of Congress listening in and a whole bunch of Hill staffers, and it was a great time, and it was fun. I got to speak, so I just thought I'd throw it out. So this is one of the, okay, it's a little gimmicky, but I think we've picked up about 20 members since we did this, so pretty cool. But there's a government alphabet soup, and again, this is sort of part of the process. But obviously, DOT is the parent of FAA. They're the regulator. We now have Department of Commerce and NOAA, which is going to be a great potential customer for Earth observation. Department of State and DDTC, extremely important if you want to do anything with foreign nationals. And as well as Commerce, of course, is another part of Commerce, which is the Commerce Control List. So those are your export licensing concerns. The NTSB is tried to get in with a new rulemaking recently. I call this maybe an impediment, but it's also it's something you need to realize. NTSB has put some rules out there, notice of proposed rulemaking, which upset everyone, even the FAA and Congress. The FCC is, of course, important for communications and frequency. DOD and U.S. Space Force, and of course, NASA is great customers. So there's a bit of alphabet soup, but it's all part of the solution. And now moving to the road ahead. Okay. So this is my view of the road ahead. You know, it's a little bit small, but clearly we have a huge broadband communications play that's in front of all of us. We've got the space habitats and the destinations, and we have representatives in this audience. Energy from space, I think, is going to be an important thing in the near future. In fact, there's a Carnegie Mellon NASA NIAC project, a phase 2 right now, with the University of Wisconsin, I think it is, or no, Washington or Wisconsin, one of those W schools. And they're going to take something about the size of that little CubeSat on your table, the little paper thing, and they're going to sort of have it expand out to be like 100, square meters of something. It's one of those origami tricks, and very exciting, very important for the future of space. And they're going to test that on the zero-G aircraft next year, which is exciting. Got zero-G in the audience. Anthony, everyone go fly zero-G. I've got my zero-G band. Fun stuff. It's important for research too. And so it's very exciting. You've got the lunar settlements, future Mars, in-space mobility, space resource utilization. But all this basically shows you a very rich and a very complex and exciting future that we can all participate and hopefully provide resources and wealth so we can maintain our way of life and the great things that we do here. So now, Pittsburgh, is it the center of the universe? I don't know. TBD, but it's a great start. So thank you very much. If you want questions, I can answer questions. But Dale, you can even ask one. So.
A quick note, Jim Dennis would be happy to get on to your ASTM.
Okay, Jim Bennett. We got another member of ASTM F47. So, exciting stuff. Well, thank you very much. I know I'm between you and leaving and having and everyone's taking tomorrow off. So, again, thank you very much. It's been great, and go Steelers, I guess, right?